Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Marco Valenti, and for the past 10 years, I ran a small but popular Italian bistro in downtown Denver called Tramonto. Before everything changed, my world was flame and steel, heat and precision, sauces reduced to silk on carbon steel pans, house-made pasta rolled thin as parchment, truffle oil drizzled like a final whisper on a risotto plate. I had a life with rhythm, built on prep lists, wine pairings, and reservations at 7:30. And then the cold came. Not winter, not a storm. This was something different, bigger. A true atmospheric collapse, a global reset, a new ice age. It started subtly. In early May, weather reports hinted at irregular high-altitude jet stream movements, pushing polar air south far earlier than expected. At first, it was brushed off. Denver had seen late snow before, but by the third week of May, the snow hadn't stopped. Roads became slushy tombs, power lines sagged under accumulating ice, and the temperature dropped every night, colder than the last. On May 24th, the first day we didn't reach above freezing, the city issued an emergency broadcast. "This is not temporary," the governor said, pale and sweating through a press conference lit by backup generators. "A polar vortex has stalled over North America. All citizens are advised to prepare for long-term cold weather conditions." Long-term. That word echoed in my head while I stood in Tramonto's kitchen, watching my sous chef Daniel stuff his duffel bag with what dry goods he could. He wasn't coming back. I didn't blame him. He had a wife and a 3-month-old in Golden. I had, well, a walk-in freezer already half full, a 10-burner gas range, and a cot in the back office I'd crashed on during busy weekends. I stayed. Denver's downtown bled out over the next few days. First the tourists left, then the commuters, then the supply trucks stopped. Cell signal went intermittent by May 28th, and the grid finally buckled on the night of the 30th. Ironically, when we hit -6 degrees Celsius, the coldest May night ever recorded in the city. The real cold hadn't even arrived yet. Day 1, May 31st. I marked the day in my worn, leather-bound kitchen notebook. The same one I use for risotto ratios and vinaigrette experiments. I scratched out the specials board and wrote Day 1 in chalk. Tramonto had become my shelter. Solid brick walls, double-paned windows, and a full gas line. As the power failed citywide, I still had heat, at least for now. Gas pressure was steady, and the kitchen stoves worked. I sealed off the dining room with quilted blankets and moved everything into the back kitchen and storage areas. Walk-ins became pantries, no longer cooled by compressor, but by the unforgiving air outside. I rationed the perishable ingredients first: cream, milk, eggs. I ate like a king for those first 2 days. Omelettes with shaved Parmigiano, toasted focaccia, steamed mussels in a saffron broth. I sipped wine with dinner like I was on the Titanic. I kept a tally on the walk-in door of every person who came by looking for help. In the first 48 hours, there were 17. Some were looters, easy to spot by the frantic way they looked over your shoulder. Others were desperate and quiet. I gave what I could. A can of beans here, a package of pasta there. But I couldn't save everyone. I was just a chef with a dwindling pantry and no way to resupply. Day 4, June 3rd, the cold got mean. Wind chills dropped below -20 degrees Celsius, and snow was falling in thick, wet clumps that froze into sheets within an hour. I ventured out that morning, wrapped in 3 layers of wool and a parka I'd bought years ago for a ski trip to Vail. I had one goal: find propane canisters from the nearby hardware store on Champa Street. Navigating downtown Denver in a whiteout is like trying to find your keys in a bowl of sugar. Everything was blanketed and muffled. The neon signs were gone, replaced by groaning power lines, and the occasional frozen car half buried in snowdrifts. I passed the smashed-out windows of a Walgreens, its shelves stripped bare. A traffic light hung limp and dead, the wind swaying it like a noose. I found the hardware store, ripped open and looted, but in the employee break room, I found 2 green Coleman propane bottles under a sink next to a rusting coffee machine. Score. On my way back, I heard shouting from an alley. That's how I met Beatrice. Beatrice Lang, survivor number 2. Beatrice was a former EMT who had been working out of a disaster triage tent outside Denver General when the hospital lost power. She was trying to reach Union Station, where rumors of a government shelter persisted. She was bundled in paramedic blues and a North Face snow jacket, with an old trauma bag slung over her shoulder. Her boots were cracked, and her face was red from exposure. I took her back to the restaurant. We had hot soup that night, lentils with bits of pancetta, and shared what news we had. She told me the truth. The government hadn't sent help in 4 days. The shelter at Union Station was real, but overrun. People were freezing to death in the tunnels. The National Guard had pulled back to Buckley Air Force Base. We decided to stay put. Day 5 to 7, June 4th, 6th. Beatrice and I turned Tremonto into a fortress. We boarded the front windows with cabinet doors and baking trays. We dragged crates of dry goods into the prep area, stacking them like sandbags. She patched the cracks in the doors with gauze and towels from the linen closet. I rigged up an improvised cooking station using the gas burners and a cast iron griddle near the wall. By day 6, we had lost cell signal completely. I taught her how to make polenta with dried mushrooms and stock cubes. She taught me how to check for frostbite. We took turns sleeping, the other keeping watch near the loading dock. At night, we listened to the howling wind and sometimes, more haunting, the silence. There was a stillness that settled over Denver during the icefall, a sense that the world had closed in on itself, that nature had taken a breath and decided it was done with us. But survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just staying warm, keeping dry, and finding one more way to stretch a ½ kilo of rice across 3 more meals. The map wall. Beatrice suggested we make a map of the area. We cleared space on the chalkboard and drew a rough street grid of downtown Denver, Larimer, Blake, 16th Street Mall, Spear Boulevard. We marked known hazards in red: flooded basements, broken glass, unstable roofs. We marked caches of food and supplies in green. The idea wasn't to explore yet, just prepare. We knew this wasn't going to end soon. On June 7th, we saw the first shimmer. Around 4:30 p.m., just before dusk, a faint aurora appeared in the sky. Not northern lights exactly, more like a halo. A green-blue wave, too far south, too bright, and too silent. Beatrice said it was from the upper atmospheric collapse, charged particles pushed out of pattern by the shifting magnetosphere. I stood by the back window, with a ladle still in my hand, soup steaming in the pot behind me. The light pulsed above the snow-drenched skyline like something out of a fable, calm, alien, and deeply wrong. There was no wind, no sound, just that eerie light bending over the tops of the frost-bitten skyscrapers, washing their glass skins in sickly turquoise. We watched it in silence. That night, neither of us slept. Day 8 to 10, a knock on steel. By June 8th, the cold had grown teeth. Wind speeds howled over 80 kilometers per h during gusts, and snow had become so fine it slipped through the smallest cracks like sand. I sealed the base of every door with rolled up aprons and scrubbed the windows with vinegar to keep frost from setting in too thick. Beatrice spent hours reinforcing her medical supplies, sorting things into waterproof bags, checking bandages, sharpening her trauma shears. Then, on day 10, while I was inventorying the remaining stock of propane tanks and canned tomatoes, we heard it. A knock. Not on the front door, which had been buried under ice and snow a meter deep, but from the loading dock in the back alley. 3 slow, deliberate thuds on the steel security shutter. Beatrice immediately went for the fire axe, her face unreadable. I shut off the kitchen burners, listening. Another knock, louder. I unlatched the inner bolt and called out, A moment later, a small voice responded. Hoarse, young, afraid. We opened the shutter slowly, just enough to let in a gust of frigid air, and the snow-crusted silhouette of a boy, no older than 12. His jacket was too thin for the weather, sleeves frayed and patched with duct tape. His hands were raw and purple from exposure. He carried a blue hiking backpack, the kind you'd buy from a Walmart clearance rack, and behind him stood two others, an older woman and a man, possibly her son. We brought them in, new faces. The boy's name was Miguel, and the older pair were Carla and James Reeves, a mother and her adult son who had worked maintenance at the Museum of Nature and Science before the collapse. They had been holed up in the underground archives at the museum, surviving on vending machine snacks, energy bars, and the last of the cafeteria's dry stock. When the food ran out, they started scavenging, working their way west on foot. They'd found Miguel on the way, alone in a half-frozen minivan outside City Park. Beatrice and I gave them hot tea and blankets and rationed them a meal of barley soup with powdered eggs stirred in for protein. I didn't have the luxury to be generous anymore, but I couldn't turn them away either. We cleared a corner of the storage area for sleeping bags and laid down plastic sheeting to keep the moisture out. James offered to help reinforce the roof venting, which had started to groan under the weight of snow. Carla helped mend our water catch system. She'd been a plumber before working at the museum. That night, Tramonto no longer felt like a restaurant. It felt like a lifeboat. Day 11, the museum fire. On June 11th, the skyline changed. Around mid-morning, a deep orange glow appeared in the southeast, the kind of haze you could only get from a serious fire. Through the frosted rear window, we could see it. Smoke rising in dense, dirty columns above the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Something had gone wrong. We watched it burn all day. No sirens, no helicopters, just silence and smoke. James didn't say anything. He sat beside the griddle, sharpening the edge of an old putty knife into something vaguely usable as a blade. I think he knew some of the museum staff were still in there. That night, Beatrice called it. We can't hold here forever. This place is solid, yes, but supplies are finite. If gas pressure drops, or we lose insulation in one of these walls, we'll freeze in our sleep. She was right. We all knew it. My shelves were down to 15 cans of food that weren't beans, and 2/3 of the pasta had been used. We had just one unopened 9 kilograms propane tank. When the pressure line finally died, no if, it would be all we had for heat and cooking. So we planned, the convoy plan. James suggested something bold, relocate. Not far, he said, unrolling a hand-drawn map Miguel had made using street signs and memory. Just 3 miles west, Federal Boulevard. There's a self-storage compound there, Fort Knox Storage. Used to be managed by an old army guy. Concrete walls, reinforced gates, solar panels too, though who knows what shape they're in now. It sounded insane, walking 3 miles in weather that dipped below minus 30 degrees Celsius at night, through snowdrifts and unknown dangers, with a child in tow. But if the building was sound, and if it had supplies, and especially if it had fuel, we might stand a chance. We'd go as a convoy makeshift sleds for supplies, snowshoes fashioned from baking racks and paracord. Beatrice prepped thermal packs and distributed spare antibiotics in case anyone suffered exposure injuries. I packed the best of what we had: canned proteins, dry yeast, flour, matches, salt, water filters, and our last siphoned fuel. We would leave at dawn on day 13. Day 13. Departure, June 13th, came with steel grey skies and wind like broken glass. Every breath burned the lungs, but we had prepared. Miguel was wrapped in 6 layers, including 2 thermal blankets, sewn into a makeshift poncho. We tied sleds with duct tape and leftover curtain rods from the dining room, dragging our gear behind us as we pushed westward. Downtown Denver was unrecognizable. Storefronts had collapsed under the weight of snow and ice. Cars were frozen mid-intersection, doors wide open, some half buried. Pigeons were gone. So were squirrels. All that remained were shadows and cold. Around Lincoln Street, we passed a burned-out police cruiser with its shotgun mount empty. There were no bodies, but plenty of signs they had once been there. Empty brass casings, blood long frozen into the sidewalk like rusted glass. By noon, we'd made it halfway and stopped to rest in a church vestibule just off Spear Boulevard. I made tea from melted snow and lemon balm leaves I'd salvaged months ago. Carla handed out the last of the granola bars she'd brought from the museum. The second half of the trip was harder. Visibility dropped as wind picked up, and it took all our effort to keep Miguel moving. Beatrice carried him at one point while James and I pulled the sleds double time. Finally, at dusk, we reached the storage compound, Fort Knox Storage. The outer wall had held, thick, poured concrete, its security gate partially buried in snow but not breached. Solar panels lined the roof, all iced over. There were 3 levels of storage units inside, and a central access office built like a bunker. Someone had tried to weld the door shut from the inside. James pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, we found signs of habitation, canned goods, 2 propane heaters, a sleeping bag, and a half-frozen corpse seated in the corner, still upright, covered in 3 layers of blankets. A note rested in the man's lap. I held out, "If you find this, make it count." We buried him behind the loading ramp under 2 meters of snow. He didn't have a name on him. We called him the Quartermaster. Securing the compound, we spent the next 2 days securing every point of entry. James found a backup battery for the office inverter, and with a few tools salvaged from the maintenance lockers, we got limited power flowing from the solar rig to charge headlamps and a radio. Miguel built a small shelf garden using seed packets from the Quartermaster's pack, just in case. Carla worked on reinforcing the ceiling ducts with sheet metal and silicone cork. I inventoried our food and rationed it to last another 20 days, assuming 2 hot meals and 1 cold per day for 5 people. On day 15, we heard radio chatter on an old Midland walkie. A male voice, calm and clipped, reading coordinates and wind speeds. Beatrice triangulated the signal to somewhere south, maybe near Buckley Air Force Base. We all stood silently around the unit, listening to the low hum and occasional static bursts. The voice repeated every 15 minutes, same cadence, same phrases. There were no direct instructions, no plea for survivors to come. It wasn't a distress call. It was a weather update, likely automated or triggered by a schedule. But it told us one very important thing. Buckley still had power. That changed everything. Beatrice and James spent that night poring over maps and calculations. Buckley Air Force Base was located just east of Aurora, about 10 miles southeast of our current shelter at Fort Knox Storage. It sounded doable until you factored in the elevation loss, open plains exposure, and the steadily worsening weather. Temperatures were averaging minus 35 degrees Celsius with wind chill. Frostbite could set in within 15 minutes of exposed skin. And yet, if Buckley had a functioning transmitter, it might have backup generators, fuel, communication, heat, people. I remember Beatrice looking at me over the map that night, her face lit by a small LED lantern, and quietly saying, "If there's a way out of this, it starts there." Day 16, 18, preparations for the trek. There was no rushing a move like this. We needed to prepare, methodically, like a kitchen line before dinner service. I divided the pantry into 2 categories: high-calorie mobility rations and stationary reserves. We vacuum-sealed strips of cured meats and hard cheese into parchment-wrapped packets. I ground up dry lentils and oats into a flour-like meal, then baked them into flat fuel bars bound with powdered egg and syrup. James and I reworked our sled system, switching to reinforced platforms built from 2 aluminum doors we salvaged from nearby units. They slid better than the curtain rods we'd used before and could carry close to 80 kilograms each. We decided on a team of 3 for the journey: Beatrice, James, and myself. Carla would stay behind with Miguel, guard the compound, and maintain the small hydroponic bin we'd assembled using heat lamps, nutrient tabs, and condensation trays. It was barely sprouting, but in another month it might yield spinach and chard, two plants that thrived in cold soil. We calculated a 4-day trek to Buckley, moving in short bursts and sheltering overnight in secure points. Our best route would follow Colfax Avenue east until Havana Street, then break southeast through suburban corridors that had once been Aurora neighborhoods. We agreed to leave on the morning of June 18th, day 19, into Aurora. By the time we departed, the wind had died, but the air felt denser, like breathing through wool. Snow crunched under our boots in a way that didn't sound natural. The sun hadn't broken through the grey ceiling in over a week. We wore 2 layers of thermal socks, insulated boots with foil-wrapped soles, and repurposed ski gear over our inner layers. Beatrice carried the radio and medkit. James wore the only working compass we had. I carried the stove, fuel, and rations. We moved fast the first day, covering nearly 3 miles before dark. East Colfax was a graveyard of businesses and rusting vehicles. Liquor stores with shattered glass, a nail salon blown open at the side, and an old coffee shop whose ceiling had caved in from snow load. In one lot, we found a delivery truck, its doors frozen shut. James used a crowbar to pry it open. Inside, boxes of dried fruit, long expired but still edible. We ate handfuls of banana chips by the handful, seated on the tailgate, grateful for the texture. We spent the night inside a public library, burning paperback romance novels in a small fire ring. I fell asleep with my boots still on, dreaming of summer streets and warm rain. Day 20, 21, the dark corridors. On the second day, we moved southeast through the old East Colfax neighborhood, avoiding overpasses and any large structures with heavy snow loads. The air had grown bitter, far below what thermometer would read. James's eyebrows were rimmed with frost. Every exposed surface on our gear was turning silver with rime. At midday, we passed what had once been a large grocery chain. Its roof had collapsed in the middle, but the loading bay remained intact. Beatrice found 4 shrink-wrapped boxes of military MREs, likely staged during the early days of the crisis, and forgotten. The bags were stiff from cold, but intact. Chili mac, rice and beans, chicken fajitas, each with a chemical heater pack. We took them all. On the evening of day 20, we found shelter in a former elementary school just north of Montview. Beatrice set a perimeter alarm using fishing line and stacked cans, an old trick she'd used in the field. We slept in a classroom, curled up near the heating pipe, which, while dead, was at least dry and insulated. I stared at the bulletin board above the teacher's desk, cut out letters spelling, "We are a community." It felt like a lie now. There was no community left, just outposts. By day 21, James was slowing down. He'd taken a fall crossing an iced-over basketball court the night before and now had a shallow cut on his thigh. Beatrice cleaned it and wrapped it, but warned it could freeze if circulation didn't stay up. Despite that, we pressed on. We had to. Buckley was close. Day 22, Buckley perimeter. We reached the outer security fence of Buckley Air Force Base by mid-morning on June 22nd. The facility was partially buried in snow and surrounded by a concrete and steel perimeter wall that stood over 3 meters high. Razor wire gleamed like icicles at the top. We approached slowly, signaling with a mirror and a heat flare. Nothing happened. No gunfire, no warnings, no one came to meet us. It took us 2 hours to navigate around to a service road where the snow had been recently disturbed. Finally, we spotted signs of habitation. Bundled cables running through snow tunnels, a half-buried antenna dish still rotating slowly, and above it, a flag, an American flag, half frozen and tattered, but visible. Then the tower light blinked. 3 short flashes, a signal. Inside Buckley, we were greeted at the South Service entry by Lieutenant Commander Henry A. Rousseau, U.S. Air Force Reserve, retired. He was in his 50s, bundled in Arctic gear, sidearm at his hip, and spoke with the steady tone of a man long past exhaustion. "This is not a shelter," he said plainly. "This is a monitoring station. Everyone else pulled out 3 weeks ago. I stayed." Inside, Buckley's inner structure had been sealed off, preserving a skeletal command post powered by a combination of natural gas and solar-fed battery systems. Russo led us to a secure control room, where a single LCD screen blinked with slow real-time updates. Surface temperatures, jet stream patterns, aurora intensities, solar flare activity, and glacial movement data from the north. NOAA, NASA, and FEMA all had once fed into this network. Now it was just one man keeping the lights on. "Best guess," he said, scrolling through maps. "This isn't a freak storm. It's a hemispheric stall. We lost the Pacific current, and without it, heat's not circulating. We're entering a permanent Arctic phase, at least for the northern latitudes." He said it with a tone like a man reading someone else's diagnosis. Factual, unemotional, terminal. The hard decision. Buckley had supplies, medical gear, batteries, signal equipment, but little in the way of food. Most of the provisions had been requisitioned during the final withdrawal. Russo offered us a choice: stay and help him maintain the data network, or take what we needed and return to our shelter. He respected that we had others counting on us. We spent the night in Buckley's comm room, surrounded by dormant servers and blinking indicators. I watched the map projections on the screen, red zones of cold pushing further and further south, covering Kansas, Oklahoma, parts of Texas. New York had gone dark. Chicago was transmitting static. By morning, we'd made our decision. We took with us a weather beacon, solar trickle charger, medical supplies, and an emergency flare beacon with the Buckley access code burned into its memory. Russo saluted us as we left, a solitary silhouette in a snowblind world. Return to Fort Knox. The return was harder. The wind had changed directions, and we were now moving against it. James's leg worsened, but he didn't complain. Beatrice had to administer antibiotics and use gauze wraps soaked in alcohol to keep the wound from freezing. On day 25, we reached the outskirts of the compound. Carla met us at the gate. Miguel ran to hug us, his face red with tears and joy. Inside, the heat lamps were still working. The battery array we'd left had held up. The tiny spinach sprouts had grown an inch taller. The compound smelled like smoke and dry wool. A good sign. It meant the propane heater had been cycled sparingly, as planned. Carla had sealed the lower units with tarps and positioned foil-lined blankets along the northern wall to reflect heat inward. Miguel proudly showed us a notebook filled with temperature readings and water use logs. He'd recorded everything. The boy had grown sharper, focused. It was the kind of transformation only hard survival can force into a young mind. We sat around a narrow table built from salvaged plywood and cinder blocks. I served warm stew reheated from the rations we'd brought back, a mix of lentils, crushed MRE components, and dried onion. No one spoke for a long time, not from sadness, but the kind of gratitude that hums underneath the bones. We had left and we had returned. That alone felt like a miracle. That night, Beatrice and I updated the wall map. We marked Buckley's confirmed location and added bright blue thumbtack where we met Russo. We also added something new, a ring drawn in red chalk that surrounded our shelter and a 3-mile radius. Priority zone, we labelled it. Everything inside that zone would be mapped, inventoried, and eventually cleared. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were planning. Day 26, 27, rebuilding routine. By the morning of day 26, the team had fallen into a new rhythm. James's leg had improved significantly after the rest. Carla kept a strict sanitation schedule, boiling laundry, rotating bedding, cleaning water filters. Beatrice maintained the medical locker and calibrated the solar panels with the new trickle charger. Miguel was in charge of internal climate, checking insulation tape, vapor barriers, and heat retention every few hours. As for me, I cooked. I had never thought my culinary career would come down to making survival rations edible and efficient, but somehow it made sense. My job was to make the little we had last longer, feel warmer, taste better. I ground wild sage leaves with a mortar we found in a neighbouring unit and mixed them with rendered fat to season our grains. I combined protein powder with flour and powdered milk to form rough loaves, which I cooked over flat stones. Some days, I mixed powdered hot chocolate with snow and let it freeze, creating tiny ice cream pucks to keep morale high. I kept track of our inventory down to the gram, creating a rotating weekly menu based on caloric need, temperature fluctuations, and physical exertion. We never ate the same meal 2 days in a row. Our water was now filtered through a gravity-fed ceramic system James had built. Every litre was tracked, waste was composted or frozen. Every decision, every action mattered. Day 28, the intruder. On the evening of June 28th, the wind dropped off for the first time in a week. We were settling in for dinner when Miguel froze near the wall. "I heard something," he whispered. We killed the lantern. We listened. Crunching snow, faint, rhythmic. Someone was outside the perimeter, moving along the fence. Beatrice and James grabbed their weapons. James with his crowbar blade hybrid. Beatrice with the salvaged bolt-action rifle we'd picked up near Colfax days earlier. We didn't have ammunition to waste, but the presence of the weapon mattered. I turned on the infrared scope on our spare binoculars, powered by one of the small solar cells Russo had given us. A human silhouette moved near the outer wall. Alone. Slow. Not looting, not running. Just walking. We waited as the figure approached the gate. He didn't try to break in. He stood there for almost 10 minutes. Then he pulled a thermos from his coat, set it on the snow, and walked away. James retrieved it an hour later. Inside, 2 litres of melted snow, a folded piece of paper, and a bullet casing. The note simply read, "I see your light. You're not alone. Day 28. It was unsigned. Day 29. The growing world. We took shifts all through the night, but no one else came. In the morning, Beatrice scanned the area for tracks. She followed the prints north for nearly a kilometre before they vanished into hard-packed ice and powder. Whoever it was, they had come from the old Stapleton direction, once an airport, now just a mass of collapsed hangars and skeletal control towers. It suggested there were others, survivors who, like us, had found a way to endure. Maybe they'd seen our flare when we tested it 2 nights earlier. Maybe they were watching us longer than we realized. That day, we finished expanding the hydroponic frame. The spinach was healthy. We added crushed MRE crackers as mulch, boiled bone powder for minerals, and extended the lamp system with a recycled mirror. Carla had even found old vitamin tablets, which we dissolved into water to feed the roots. Miguel stood over it like a farmer from another century. I started a second yeast culture using leftover pasta flour and dried apple peel. It fermented overnight in a mason jar beside the heater, and by morning it had bubbled up like a newborn. I named it Vincent. Seemed appropriate for something stubborn and alive in a frozen world. Day 30, ice silence, June 30th. Exactly 30 days since the collapse began. We woke up to a stillness that seemed almost ceremonial. No wind, no distant cracking of ice, just silence. The kind you can feel, like cotton packed inside your ears. Outside, the temperature was holding steady at -42 degrees Celsius, with a humidity so low our breath barely fogged the air. I cooked pancakes, actual pancakes, powdered eggs, protein powder, water, a touch of yeast, and rehydrated MRE syrup. Everyone ate slowly, grateful. After breakfast, we powered on the radio. No signal from Buckley, just static. Beatrice rechecked every frequency, every emergency band. The weather beacon was down. No data, nothing. Either the power had failed, or Russo had left, or something else had happened. We spent most of the day maintaining the compound, but no one said it. We were thinking the same thing. We'd just become the furthest node on the grid. That night, We gathered our warmest gear and climbed to the roof access. Something we rarely did unless checking the panels. The sky was clear, and there it was again. The shimmer, pale green and violet bands danced across the dark sky. Auroras too low, too strong, too close. They weren't the soft ribbons of Alaska. These were aggressive pulses, snapping and folding like some cosmic warning. But they were also beautiful. We stood shoulder to shoulder, 5 survivors at the edge of what had once been a world of cities, highways, screens, and clocks. That was gone now. And this was our beginning. The new cycle. We no longer count days in weeks. We count them in tasks completed, panels cleared, systems checked, seedlings sprouted, liters rationed. We no longer measure time by hours, but by the cycles of wind and light, by the distant cracking of tree limbs, the shifting weight of snow, the pressure inside propane canisters. Miguel is building a sled with reinforced runners. He says he wants to map out the area beyond the red zone next week. He'll go with Beatrice. She's already plotting waypoints. Carla's begun to talk about planting outdoors. She thinks with thermal boxes and windbreaks, we can build something small and self-contained, a winter farm. James walks with a cane now, but he's strong. He's carving tools out of scavenged steel, things we can trade when that day comes. And me, I've started a new journal. This one's not for recipes, it's for everything else. There's a quote I wrote on the first page, something I heard once back in culinary school. I didn't understand it then. You endure not by resisting the fire, but by becoming the one who feeds it. We are still here. The world has frozen, but we are not done yet. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.